I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. I am Mary Keeler, and I am the Vice President of the Idaho Democratic Women's Caucus, and we are very welcome to have us join tonight Melissa Winthrop, who is the Senate Minority Leader, unfortunately not majority, and also Alana Robel, the House Minority Leader. Please give a warm welcome to these ladies and as they join us and give us our update on what's happening so far in the session. Can you please introduce yourself, Melissa Winthrop? Give us a little bit about yourself.
Well, hello, everybody. It's nice to see you all. It's been a busy day, so I just came winging in from my car, but I've been in the legislature for 10 years, in the Senate for 4, the House 6, and it's a real honor to be the Senate Minority Leader. I'm a senator here in District 19 in Boise. Does that do it for you?
And Alana?
So I'm Alana Rubel. I represent District 18, which is kind of south and southeast Boise. For those of you familiar with Boise, I represent about BSU out through Micron along the river there. I have served in the legislature for 11 years, all of them in the House. I've been the House Minority Leader for 5, 6 years, something like that. I was the Assistant Minority Leader before that. And super excited to be here with you all tonight. We have lots to talk about.
Well, thank you for introducing yourselves. We came up with some questions that we want to start with, and then if we have time at the end, we'll have questions from attendees. Our first question is about the legislature. The upcoming this current legislative session consists of 14% of Democrats and 87% Republicans. Registered voters in Idaho include 36% unaffiliated voters, 19% are third party and Democrats, which means that 55% of our citizens are potentially unrepresentative. What can we do to ensure the views of all Idahoans will be represented, especially when most of our legislators are not Democrats? And since the legislature has seen more Republicans come in this year, how will this impact bills that come to the floor?
You tell me who you want to start.
How about you start, Melissa?
I got to tell you, I probably shouldn't start today because I'm a little saucy. That's a good question. And you're talking about, really after the Republican primary and millions of dollars coming in to knock out folks in particular that would oppose vouchers. What we're seeing in the Senate is a real extreme bent. Used to be the Senate was a place that it was kind of a backstop, reasonable. We would deliberate and stop things, but unfortunately now the Senate has been overcome with the more extremists and establishment Republicans. And so we're seeing very extreme things just kind of flying through. The Senate so far hasn't had too many bills. It's just starting to ramp up today. I saw some things in committee, but overall, I think there's a real problem with a fixation on these extreme bills and really limiting personal freedoms, controlling people as far as what they read, where they get their care. You're seeing censorship on the university campuses and so forth. So I think broadly it's a real challenge. But I have to say, I still have a lot of people under their breath in the state house who work there who are like, keep fighting, you're doing great, we're with you. There's a lot of people that are rooting for us. And so I think for Alana and I and the rest of the Democratic caucus is really staying strong and really representing fiercely the values that we have and making sure we're doing it with our shoulders back in a civil way, in a reasonable way, in efforts to help people understand that we really are the adults in the room trying to work on problems that really matter to Idahoans instead of all the fray that really isn't helping our lives, right? So we haven't done a ton in the Senate, so I'm going to turn it over to Atlanta, where a lot of the things are already starting to fly through, and we're going to see them later.
Yeah. This has been a long-standing problem in the Idaho legislature, is the totally fundamental disconnect between what the legislature spends its time doing and, you know, what it does versus the desires of the people of Idaho. It is profoundly non-reflective, not just of our values as Democrats, but really of the interests and values of the people. And, you know, I always knew this kind of from knocking doors. I've knocked doors all over the state, tens of thousands of doors, and pretty much everybody just says, you know, I want better public schools. I want to make sure we have, you know, nice, clean outdoor spaces. I love my public lands. I want to make sure I have a safe community, kind of day-to-day life issues. You know, I want to get rid of grocery tax. And then you come in this building and you would think that transgender athletes were the biggest, you know, and Judy Blume books were the biggest threats to American society. And that's what they spent all their time doing. And we actually had some interesting corroboration on this disconnect lately. So we every year, Boise State University, their School of Public Policy, does this survey that is perfectly well balanced. They do it geographically balanced. It's balanced by ideology and partisanship. So it is majority Republicans responding, majority conservatives responding, and from all over the state. And I'm just going to read you some of the numbers that came out of that to show how disconnected things are. So 55% of Idahoans believe that abortion should be legal at least through the first trimester. And 64% of Idahoans believe that there should be a health exception to our abortion laws. Neither of those, of course, is the case at all. In fact, they won't even allow a hearing or a vote on any kind of health exception whatsoever. And certainly there is no abortion legal at any stage of the process. Gosh, the top priority of those polls was affordable housing, something that the legislature will not address at all. The second was funding of K-12 public education, again, something that is we desperately struggle to get on the agenda at all. Let's see, on education, 48% said their top priority was to increase salaries for public school teachers, 20% that their salary was to improve public school building facilities. Only 14% said their priority was to fund private religious schools. Well, guess what is taking up all the oxygen in the room in the legislature is funding private religious schools. So you would never get, from here, you know, being in this building, you would think that was the top priority of everybody in Idaho. But in fact, it's way down the list and only 14% of people wanted it all. So we have a serious disconnect between what people want and what they're getting from the Republican supermajority. I think a lot of that is tied to our broken closed primary system, because I think a lot of these Republican legislators would basically say, I don't care what a majority of people want. I don't even care what a majority of people in my own district want, because that's not how I get reelected. You know, all I have to satisfy are the 20% most right wing of the people who show up in my closed primary. And as long as I get the majority of those people, I'll be in office forever. So all I really need is to get 11% of the vote, and I'm, you know, made in the shade from an electoral perspective. So we have an incredibly skewed system that is kind of structured to make sure that people don't get what they want, which sadly could have been fixed with Prop 1, but people did not take that lifeline.
I guess my main question is, you know, most of us don't live in Boise. We don't have people who are representatives are not Democrats. I guess how do we try our best to make sure that our voices are still heard?
Well, I'll jump in a lot and say, I mean, in some ways, you actually are in the best position to advocate, because for a lot of the people in like when there's some crazy thing going on, everyone says, call your legislator and tell them to vote against this or tell them to vote for this. Well, for all of our friends in Boise, there's really no point in them calling me and Melissa. We always love to hear from people, but we're going to vote your way no matter what. But you have a unique power when you're in Nampa or in Coeur d'Alene or Lewiston or wherever it is that you are, because you actually have people who need to be persuaded, who you can call and say, I'm your constituent, I'm watching, this is what I want you to do. So in a way, you're kind of uniquely empowered to have an impact where it's needed if you're outside of those areas that have, you know, Democratic representation. Now, that said, you may not be happy with how your person is voting most of the time, but you are well situated to make the case to them that they need to vote differently. And ultimately, hopefully, you will someday get involved in a campaign to kick them out.
Okay, our second question is about parental rights in education. The Idaho Constitution requires a general, uniform, and thorough system of free public schools. Yet some members of the Republican Party, which is the majority, want to shift public funding for private schools. What is your position on parents receiving public dollars for private education, including through tax vouchers, tax credits, vouchers, or education savings accounts? What is the best way for us to make our opinion known to legislature about this issue?
Well, I'll start and I'll let Alana back clean up on this. Yeah, whew. Well, here's the thing. I think we're all very strongly opposed to any voucher scheme that siphons public money away from public schools, right? And we know through other states that have been doing this that it not only busts their budget, but it doesn't actually increase the positive outcomes for students and their learning. Arizona is a good example where they started out with maybe 12,000 students and now it's, I think it's like 80,000 students. It's up to like they reserved maybe 40 million. Now it's up to like 800 million. So we know it's clear that it's not, it will in an environment in our legislature where we're constantly competing for funds for public services that people value. We know that funding two different school systems is not going to work and it's going to harm public schools, especially in rural areas. Really, as Alana's very well versed on this issue, but the research tells us that the people that actually will benefit are those who are already in private schools, and it'll just subsidize, wealthier parents to basically just send their kids there. Steve Birch is really good about saying, school choice. We have a ton of school choice. We have open enrollment, we have magnet schools, charter school. I mean, we have everything there is. We lead the nation in school choice. So it's not about choice. It's about taking money without accountability and writing parents a blank check to support their already, where they're sending their kid now. And again, as Steve said, school choice is really not about your choice. It's about your neighbor's choice. You're funding your neighbor's choice, not your own. So I think all of us are very much opposed to anything that would deter us from our constitutional obligation to fund that free, uniform, fair public school system to try to divert that money away. And it's just a no-go. We know that, and we're doing all we can to strategize and fight against anything that's going to harm our public schools, as well as create competition for basic things of infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, et cetera. So yeah, go Alana.
Yeah, I think our entire caucus is united in being very passionately opposed to any of these things. And there's a kind of a word game going on, and Melissa referenced this. So vouchers pull very poorly among people. People are very hostile to vouchers. So now they're trying to reinvent new terminology to kind of run away from the negative associations of vouchers. So they're calling them ESAs, education savings account, refundable tax credits, etc. It's all the same thing. It's all taking public dollars and siphoning them through one mechanism or another into unaccountable private and religious schools. And I can't say enough terrible things about this. Melissa did a good job of overseeing the budget buster. It bears more emphasis. Every single state that has done this has exploded their budget to incredible detriment of every other item that you'd have in a budget. So Arizona is the most salient example. And by the way, that's what they said they want to replicate. So the first day of session, they brought in Governor Doug Ducey and the entire Arizona team and said, oh, Arizona system is so great. This is what you should do. And the people brought it in. We're like, yeah, this is what we want to do. Arizona has been top of the charts on Disastersville. So as Melissa said, they went from what they promised was about $50 million. It's now, last I heard, I've heard two different numbers, 825 million a year and 900 million a year, either disastrous. They have had to defund everything. They've had to cut hundreds of millions of dollars from infrastructure programs. They've had to defund community colleges, police, healthcare. Everything has been gutted to feed this monster that is eating their budget, which is, basically funding private schools, because they just took on a huge liability to cut checks to wealthy families who already have their kids in private school. And that's where the money went. It didn't, and they like to create this fiction that, oh, it'll help that poor inner city kid finally leave their struggling public school and go to an amazing elite private school. Absolutely does not happen. That is not how this plays out at all. The check they cut you will never be enough to go to a fancy private school. All it will do is line the pockets of the wealthy people who are already in the private school, who were not currently cutting checks to. The education outcomes, again, in Arizona, they've actually been very poor. All kinds of rip-off joints have sprung up because there's no accountability. They don't have to have testing or certified teachers or any curriculum. And this has always been my talking point on it. I always say I am too conservative to support vouchers. And I don't know how the world got so upside down Uh-oh, I hear
He
somebody.
also
Someone
has
might
said
need to
that
mute.
mass deportations of the type described by
Can
the
someone mute
Trump
who's got their
campaign
TV on?
during the campaign and now by the Trump
It's
administration.
Lynn. There you go.
There you go. Okay, sorry. But you know, the essence of this, when we send money to public schools, we don't just do it to make parents happy. We do it because it's part of a social contract where we all say, hey, you know what? Even those of us without kids need an educated populace. We need people who can go out there and be educated in the world and keep society going and know the difference between Mark Twain and Winston Churchill and can make an intelligent vote. We have a whole lot of things we expect from education, and that's why we cut checks for it. And that's why when we do that, we say, okay, we'll give you this money for this kid, public schools, but you got to do all these things. You got to teach them algebra and geometry and chemistry and American government and American history and all these things. And you better have certified teachers, and you better test the kids to make sure they can read and do all this. And I think that's good. We have all those standards. But then somehow all of that goes out the window when you're talking about private schools and say, oh, but if you want to take public tax dollars and go to a private school, we don't care what you do. Those kids can just go wander in the woods all day. We don't care. Here, have some free government money. It feels like the most anti-conservative thing I could think of, to just take public money and hand it out like candy with absolutely no accountability. Oh, someone asked, my statement is, I'm too conservative to support vouchers. I think it is profoundly anti-conservative to just give out free government money with no strings attached.
Because suddenly all the party that always cares about money, government money being sort of foolishly wants to give people money. So absolutely no, tracking, nothing that you would expect to give. You don't get money to public schools for nothing. You track every single penny.
Yep, got to jump through a lot of hoops to get that money if you're a public school.
Well,
So-
and just think about health and welfare, right? We have a whole fraud investigation team that we spend millions of dollars just to track down a penny if somebody is, committing fraud in welfare, right? So, maybe we better attach on the voucher schemes a little fraud investigation unit and put some millions bucks in there to track people down.
So my next question is about Medicaid expansion. In 2018, Idaho voters passed Medicaid expansion. It expanded healthcare access and coverage for low-income individuals in Idaho, otherwise did not have insurance. Unfortunately, there's been some discussion about adding work requirements or repealing altogether. Do you support Medicaid expansion in its current form? What can we do to stop the legislator from undermining this policy?
Who would you like to tackle first?
You should start.
Me? Okay, great. Yeah, I have lots to say on this issue. I am a very strong supporter of Medicaid expansion. I did a lot of signature collecting and went door to door hard when this was on the ballot back in 2018 and have been fighting to keep it ever since. I think some of the things, there's a really false narrative that's been stirred up around Medicaid expansion, which is this, oh my gosh, it's out of control. It's blown through all the original, projections. And unless we end it, we're going to be bankrupt, is what they want you to think, which is really quite the opposite of what the reality is. Actually, it would cost us an incredible amount of money. It would be a huge economic hit if we got rid of Medicaid expansion. They really overblow the cost overruns. There was a great article in the Statesman in December about this. So it is more than was projected. It's about, in terms of what the state spends on Medicaid expansion, it's gone up about 48% since 2019. Now, if you factor in population growth and inflation, you would expect it to go up about 42%. So it went up 48% versus 42%. That is hardly like crazy exponential out of control budget busting. That's actually pretty modest. And I'm sure we could look at a lot of other programs and things that have gone way over that projection. So it's not a budget buster. In fact, it's very good for our budget, because when you look at it, the vast majority, it's the deal of the century for Idaho. We're getting about $1 billion a year from the federal government to cover the people on Medicaid expansion. And this money makes its way into our economy. It's getting paid to hospitals and doctors and nurses and bolstering their families. It's a great economic growth booster all around. And it's just a stimulant for our economy. You suck out $1 billion from Idaho's economy, we're going to feel it. I mean, that's going to have recessionary impact. So it is not good for our economy to end Medicaid expansion. It is terrible for our economy. But then looking even beyond the $1 billion you're looking at sucking out of the economy, and of course the human misery and insecurity that comes with that, and now you have families that are going to be driven into homelessness and bankruptcy from medical bills they can't pay. That all comes at a very significant cost. You're going to see rural hospitals shutting down because all of a sudden they're not going to have the pool of insured patients, and they're going to have people showing up with no insurance. You're going to see costs on taxpayers, because one of the things they don't talk about is in the bad old days before Medicaid expansion, we actually had to pay tens of millions of dollars as taxpayers every year, because people who are uninsured still get hit by buses, they still have heart attacks, they still show up in emergency rooms, and the hospitals have to treat them. And when they rack up those costs, you and I eat those costs. They pass it on to the taxpayer. Right now, we're passing those costs on to the federal government, or at least 90% of those costs. Deal of the century. Why in the world would we say, oh, we don't want the federal government picking up 90% of the costs. We want to pay 100% of the costs ourselves. And somehow that's going to save us money. It is a fraud they are perpetrating on the people of Idaho. Their whole underpinning financial argument does not hold up at all. What they are proposing is actually incredibly costly in both financial and human terms. It will reduce the quality of care for all of us, because we will all have less access to medical resources. You won't have as many doctors when you have, 40% less patients. You're going to have fewer services, even for the people on private insurance. So it's a really bad deal all around. I think you just need, and again, for all those people who don't have blue legislators, this is a great opportunity for you to get some of those talking points to your representatives and say, please don't do this. You're going to hurt me as a taxpayer. And maybe that's an argument they'll listen to. Melissa?
Well, I don't think I have anything to add to that. It's pretty thorough.
But even implementing work requirements is expensive, because look at Georgia. They implemented work requirements on their Medicaid expansion and no one signs up for it. And it's even more expensive to run, because it takes people to track down employment and volunteer work and keep track of it.
Yeah. Well, I think, you're exactly right, is that, checking on people that way is building an administrative cost. So you're growing government and staffing. But, honestly, the Medicaid expansion population, well over 80% of them are reporting work. And my guess is the other percent has been diagnosed with a serious mental illness or a substance abuse issue. And in fact, that is the case. I think it's about a third. So if the legislature really cares about mental health and substance abuse, which they say they do, this is a population that significantly needs it, and they're benefiting from it and getting back in the workforce. So, yeah, as Alana said, it's just all the way around a fraudulent argument they're using.
So our next question is about childcare funding, which affects all working families across Idaho. So adequate childcare funding in Idaho affects working families and the state's economy daily. Women are disproportionately affected since they are the primary child care provider. In your opinion, what action should the legislature take to help providers stay open and ensure that families have access to affordable child care?
Well, I'll start on this one, I guess, so we all believe in childcare as a fundamental, foundational piece of a thriving economy, right? If you have good childcare, you actually keep, families together and people working in the workforce and so forth. The legislature in 2023, in my committee, a Republican, Carl Bierke, made a motion to expand a rule that allowed for 178% poverty level to get childcare. And he said, if it's going to help more people, we should do it, which I was shocked, and we all voted for it. So we had a rule that actually expanded the eligibility for people to receive childcare support. And the ICCP program, the Idaho Child Care Program, is fully federally funded. There's no state monies that go into it at all. And what happened in this last fall, as you saw, is that the Department of Health and Welfare, playing some political games, made some prediction that they would run out of money. There was $50 million sitting there. And instead of using that $50 million and helping keep childcare going for that expanded eligibility, they cut it off in about a 2-day time. And then people were just grappling to try to apply for it, et cetera. So we have a real problem right now. Every chance I get, I am advocating for that. In fact, I've done a lot of work in the child protection area, and the new director of health and welfare has said it's a priority for him to, increase foster care and decrease child protection cases and so forth. And so he's putting a lot of money there. And he keeps saying prevention, prevention, prevention. And I keep telling him and every camera that gets in front of me, the best way to prevent is to make sure you have good childcare, because then you don't have people making decisions about, oh God, I got to go work my 2 jobs and where are my kids going? And do I leave them alone, or the sketchy neighbor down the street? Right. And then you get in a place where you might have a child neglect case or harm to a child, which is even worse. So the unfortunate part is I have tried to appeal to my colleagues that Trump actually ran on childcare, said, hey, we're gonna invest in that. JD Vance did as well. So publicly I've said, hey, Trump is for this. You guys voted for Trump. The money's not going to get cut off, or nor should it. So you should be making sure we have childcare for folks. Unfortunately, there are still many of my colleagues that believe that women should be in the home and not working, and they are not going to support childcare programs. So that is a case where you and these other areas can, advocate on behalf of childcare and how that keeps families together and provides, you know, peace of mind for somebody to go into the workforce and they're actually more productive, right? So we are definitely fighting hard as best we can in front and behind the scenes to try to get that money back. There is a budget item for that program again, but I don't think it's going to increase in eligibility. So I'll do everything I can in the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee to find a way to get money there. But unfortunately, the Republicans just don't like it. They won't do it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think it's this ideological notion that as long as we strip childcare away, that women will be forced back into the kitchen, which they've pretty much openly said on the floor. If you remember Charlie Shepard's famous comment of anything that allows women to leave the home, he can't get behind. But this population in question that Melissa was talking about, the people who have essentially been stripped of that childcare assistance, these are pretty darn low income people. I mean, the federal poverty line is ridiculously low. For an individual, it's $15,000 a year about. So if you're making 140% of that, you're really poor. You're making $20,000 a year. Your average childcare place is, going to be in the neighborhood of around $1,000 a month. If you're making that kind of money, there is zero chance that you have $1,000 a month lying around to pay for childcare. It's a miracle if you can put a roof over your head and pay for food and electricity. It's so really without, you're really forcing them onto the social safety net and probably onto costlier programs by denying them this childcare assistance that would allow them to be more self-supporting and get into the workforce.
Thank you. So our next question is about women's healthcare in Idaho. Idaho's abortion ban is one of the most restrictive reproductive policies in the country. This caused an exodus of our obstetricians and closures of labor and delivery units, as well as imposes tremendous economic and emotional stress on Idaho families and their physicians. A lot of Idahoans believe that women should have access to reproductive healthcare options, including abortion. What is your perspective? And do you think we'll see any amendments being passed this year that will address the safety and healthcare of women with pregnancy complications and clarify our physicians' rights and responsibilities?
Well, I guess I'll start. So anything on abortion has to go through Chairman Brent Crane on the House State Affairs Committee, who is the most maniacal abortion banner on the planet. He was a sponsor of our total abortion ban. He has blocked any bill that would have any kind of health exception or anything from, to give you an example. So the standard for abortion in Idaho right now is that death must be certain. They always say there's a life exception, don't worry about it. Well, you have to basically be facing certain death in order to qualify. Not likely death, not possibility of death, not loss of body organ, not completely non-viable fetus that has no possibility of survival. None of that will get you a legal abortion in Idaho. Someone tried to bring a bill a couple of years ago saying, how about softening it so that you can get an abortion where death is merely likely as opposed to certain? Brent Crane said, no way, not even going to allow it a hearing or a vote in my committee. Too liberal. So that's what we're looking at. He will not let anything in that committee that will soften anything at all. And you're right, it's a disaster. Oh, Brent Crane, Crane. It's a House State Affairs Committee. So no, it's a wholesale disaster. Everything you said about the exodus of doctors is true. It's kind of dangerous to be a pregnant person in Idaho right now. I encounter people all the time who say, we wanted to build a family, but we don't dare do it under these laws. Or people saying, I wanted to talk my daughter into moving back to Idaho, but I'm not gonna because I don't want her to come back here and try to have a family here. It's a huge problem with no credible course to fix it legislatively. Now, that said, I think if we could get it on the ballot, we could definitely fix it through a ballot initiative, which is why, I don't know if we'll get to it, they're working so hard to destroy ballot initiatives to make sure, and same guy, Brent Crane, his committee, is bringing through a bill to ostensibly end ballot initiatives so that we don't even have that avenue to try to fix it.
The only thing I would add to that is that was, very succinct, is some of my Republican colleagues have said they want to do a health exception, but it's a handful of what I would call establishment Republicans. And I just don't think they have the power or the strength to actually carry through. And as Alana said, there's just a few people making decisions in the State House right now, which is really the most troubling part I see of government, is that when you only have one or two people making decisions and everybody's falling in line, that's not good government. And that's an erosion of really the institutions that we call dear. And it's a real sad thing for us right now. So I think there are some people that have said they're interested in it, but again, with Crane at the helm, Mike Moyle, those guys, I don't see it happening. And as Alana said, we're going to have to really, the most important thing we all can do right now is to fight against that awful bill that came into state affairs that would limit, the ballot initiative process, and basically say that you have to have 60% of the vote in order to pass it, whereas right now it's a simple majority. And when you think about it, there's some really significant things that have passed at 58 and 59%, like the homeowners exemption was passed by a citizens initiative, right? We wouldn't even have that, even though they've capped that and monkeyed with that. So every time the citizens say we want something, this legislature in its paternalistic controlling fashion decides they're going to make it a different way. So I'm really troubled that citizens, we can't, we have got to fight against that hard, because that is one of the key things that we actually have as Idahoans to hold the government accountable, that one thing. So I know
I want to underscore what Melissa said. To me, that is the most important thing we have to fight against, is that change to the ballot initiative. Because you all saw what happened in the last election in Florida, where they passed abortion rights with 57% of the vote, and it still failed because they had a 60% threshold. And that's what they want to do in Idaho, because I think they know a majority of people would vote yes on a reproductive rights ballot initiative, but I don't think we could get over 60%. I think we could get to, 54, 55%, and they want to make sure that that would fail. And once we lose the ballot initiative, right, we can't fix anything. That's how, we couldn't get something like Medicaid expansion. So that is kind of the biggest structural crisis facing us, I think, is that attempt to change the ballot initiative threshold to 60%. So if there's one thing you're going to come out guns a-blazing on this session, come out against House Bill 2.
Okay, our next question is about voting rights. So currently Idahoans can use absentee ballots, vote early, and register on election day. The new voting laws passed during the last session made it difficult for some individuals, including students, nursing home residents, and disabled citizens, to vote. How can we ensure that the voting rights of all citizens are protected? And do you foresee any bills being proposed this session that reduce even our current voting rights?
Yeah, I'll start on this one. I think, again, Alana and I and the whole caucus believe that the most, important thing in, our democracy is that citizens have, fair, free access to the ballot, right? That you need to be able to vote. And we've seen this legislature continue to put a stranglehold on our rights there. They passed a bill to deny students the ability to use their student ID to verify who they are. We have a bill, that was passed that's made it really hard for anyone to vote, because, even if you've moved here and you have an out-of-state license, you can't use that to verify who you are. I would hope that we would fix that, but I had that problem many times. You know, any government ID should suffice itself to say this is who I am, and then bring in the proof of where you live. I mean, I think that's what's really disheartening and frustrating about this legislature over and over, is that, you know, they're so controlling. They want to control everything. They don't want you to get to the ballot. You know, and you should be able, I had a bill my very first year to basically create a permanent absentee ballot. So if you wanted to vote absentee, you could do that permanently until you undid it, right? So made it easier on you. And I had somebody say to me, you know, it's a privilege to vote. And I said, excuse me, it is a right, and people died for that. All you got to do is be a citizen and 18. You don't have to own property. You don't have to be educated. There is no privilege to that. But that's the mindset of a lot of these folks, is that it's a privilege for you to take the day off work, go find your polling station 100 miles away. And I think it's sad. And we've seen, you know, Alana's probably going to talk about what happened up in Moscow, so I'll let her do that. But, you know, again, we fully believe and will fight for access to the ballot.
Yeah, we have a serious crisis with ballot access here, and it's a huge problem. The laws that they passed have made voting almost impossible for young people, and I think we have some people from up in Moscow. The stories I'm hearing from up there were that they made it so hard that almost no young people could vote, because the kinds of ID that you are now required to prove your residence are the kind of things that no young person will have. So it used to be that it was pretty simple. You could just fill out a card, put the last 4 digits of your social, and that was pretty much enough. And you could register someone at the door with this card. Now they have to go in with this elaborate documentation, not just of citizenship, but to prove residency. So you need a current driver's license at your current address, or you need to bring in proof of a property tax statement in your own name, or a utility bill in your own name. Well, when you think of how student life is, you know, you got 6 guys living in a house together. They're not going to change their driver's license to that address that they're only going to be at for 8 months. So they're not going to have a driver's license at that address. Many of them are not going to have the utility bill. You know, maybe one guy in the house pays the utility bill, and everybody pays Bob back at the end of the month. And so only Bob can now vote because nobody else has a utility bill in their own name. They made it so darn hard and so onerous. You can't register online at all. You basically have to now drive across town and wait in line at the county clerk's office, or you can theoretically do it same day, but it's very time consuming. So my understanding is what happened up in Moscow is it was so hard for these people to register that the lines were like 7 hours long, and most people gave up without voting. And this has had a huge impact. And you know, it's hard to parse it out, because how do you count people who despaired and left the line before they vote? But when you look at the top, you know, Moscow and that area had been trending a little more Republican. I think Trump won that district by 4 or 5 points in 2020. This time he won it by 19 points. I question whether it really swung that hard, or whether they just effectively disenfranchised all the Democrats in Moscow. I mean, I think that's basically what happened, is they just prevented, you know, 5 or 6 precincts of the most blue voters from actually being able to vote by making sure they had 7-hour lines to stand in. It is a huge problem. And again, same guy, Brent Crane, I'm a little bit discouraged, because any bill to fix this has to go through his committee. I was on a panel with him for the Idaho Statesman in December, and I raised this concern and said, basically, students can't vote anymore. Babe Vote, which tries to do these voter registration drives, they find that at least 35% of the people that they meet with who are perfectly legal citizens, legal residents, etc., simply cannot vote because they can't come up with the ID that the state now requires. And it's not just young people, it's old people too. The League of Women Voters, who would do these voter registration drives at senior homes, they said the voter registration drives they did 2 years ago yielded over 1,000 voter registrations. This time they got about 60, I think. So they have completely shut down senior voting too, because they may not have up-to-date driver's licenses, et cetera, right? If you're not driving anymore and you're in a senior home, why are you going to go to the DMV to renew your license? So I raised these concerns, and particularly about the students, and Brent Crane said, this law did exactly what it was intended to do. If a student is just going to be in the area for 4 years, they're not sufficiently invested in their community, and they shouldn't be able to vote. So he was laser focused on disenfranchising students. I thought it was a fairly stunning admission for him to publicly make that the goal was to disenfranchise students, and it worked. But the bad news is that any fix has to go through his committee. And, you know, there's no way he's going to hear a bill that makes it possible for students to vote again. So, but I do think if, you know, if there's enough public pressure and enough people engage on this issue and he gets enough of a black eye in the press about it, right now he's kind of been able to get away with this nefarious conduct without too much public scrutiny. But if we raised a real ruckus and started writing letters to the editor and really bringing a laser focus on the fact, you know, because I've got some legislation I would like to bring to at least ease up a little bit on these requirements. And, you know, maybe with enough public focus and pressure, I don't think he's on the right side of public opinion on this. I don't think that most people think that students shouldn't be able to vote.
Yeah.
I think most people see students still as tax-paying people who pay taxes. They go to the store, they benefit our economy. They've been able to stay 1 year. Well, so most people stay, you know, 4 years. That's still great. At least they contribute. They'll most likely come back just to visit or, you know, attend alumni. It's kind of a short-sighted. So our next
It seems
question is
odd to me to say that a 20-year-old has less of a stake in our society than an 80-year-old. A 20-year-old needs a job market, they need a planet, they need a lot of things that are going to last 60 plus years. I think some might say they have more of a stake.
So our next question is about climate change. So Idaho's 2024 wildfire season was one of the worst in recent memory, with over 140 structures being destroyed. As the fires in California have shown us, no one is immune from the dangers of climate change. But the state of Idaho does not have a climate plan or climate goals. Actually, saying the word climate change is like a dirty word in this legislature. How do you encourage our legislators to address this urgent issue?
Well, I think first they have to see it is an issue, right? We do finally see that the governor in his budget is appropriating monies for fire mitigation, and typically in how we pay the fire bills, we do it kind of in a backward way. So this is the first time in JFAC we've basically said, hey, let's put a little bit money ahead, so we don't, you know, get too far behind in these fire bills. And my colleagues in JFAC are fighting that. It's so funny. I mean, I'm at a loss on this one because, you know, most of the Republicans don't want to admit that this is an issue. There's a fear about, you know, doing solar, wind, etc. There's all kinds of propaganda, this, that, and the other thing. So I don't know. I'm at a loss. Maybe Alana has something there. I have to apologize, but you know, she's on resources, so she might know.
Well, I went through the ringer on this. So I hosted the only climate change hearing that has ever been held in the building. It was a huge event. It was a number of years ago. We actually had like 600 people show up, and we had 5 overflow rooms. It was a pretty great event, but they would not allow me to hold it in committee because the chairman of the Environment Committee told me that climate change was a hoax and he wouldn't waste a minute of his committee's time on it. So I had to go and host an independent hearing just on my own. And then, you know, it was an unofficial hearing. I just took over the Lincoln Auditorium and brought in a bunch of speakers, and they were very sobering speakers. I tried to be laser focused on Idaho. We didn't talk about polar bears or rising oceans or any of that. It was all about what is this going to do to Idaho? What is it going to do to our snowpack and our wildlife and our fire season and our ski resorts and our, you name it. And it was really chilling. It was basically, they were predicting a pretty frightening future where obviously the fire situation, they were predicting loss of snowpack by July or August, which is really what fuels our rivers. There was, you know, they were talking about it being pretty credible in the near future that our rivers will be running dry by late summer. It will, of course, shut down hydropower, because if you've got no river, you got no hydropower. I mean, there were projections in the next couple decades of some very frightening things. And of course, drought, impact on agriculture. I tried pitching to the agriculture folks and said, hey, this is your issue. You should stand up on this. You know, you're going to need this water. You're going to need your crops to not die in a drought. And they were sort of interested, but like, well, you can't call it climate change. We'll just have to, maybe we'll talk about improving water storage or other things, but it can't be under the discussion of climate change. So I was not able to get too far in the legislative process, needless to say. I've had to kind of nibble around the edges. I did get a bill on solar power through, but frankly, we were on defense. The biggest win we got was to prevent them from banning the teaching of climate change in school. So while we were trying to proactively address climate change, they were coming at it from the other angle and saying nobody should even be allowed to talk about it in public schools. So we were fortunate just to beat that back. But it is really disturbing. Our heads are so far in the sand, it's not even funny. And right now with the federal government, you know, I think probably federal policy was our best way to tackle that. And that's looking pretty dark right now. So I don't know where we're at. There's, you know, I'm hoping maybe now that, you know, Trump is in Elon Musk's pocket, that maybe Republicans will become at least less hostile to electric cars and plug-in vehicles. But it's frightening that we are not making any progress fast on that issue, but we are trying, and we're trying to build awareness everywhere that we can.
Okay, we got one more question. So how can women, particularly in Idaho, most effectively influence legislative change and ensure their voices are heard in a red state like ours?
You know, I'll start with this and I'll let Alana back clean up. I think one of the things that we all need to do is recognize the real hard swing of this pendulum. And it's swinging really hard to fascism and totalitarianism and theocracy and so forth. And so we got to do everything we can to document the record and not let things go. But I think one of the most important things that we can do is in your own circles of influence, we have to have, you know, really open, compassionate conversations with people. We have to listen. We have to try to figure out how to get back to the middle of things. And so I think some of it is we're going to have to go back to like the 1970s, right? We had consciousness raising, we had foundational grassroots organizing. You know, I think we're going to have to shift the hearts and minds of folks around us. We're going to have churches talk to other churches. We're going to I mean, it's going to take a while because right now, well, I don't know if it'll take a while. I mean, it's hard to say. But if we look at history and we see how social movement has progressed, we see great social change, backlash, great social change, backlash, right? We've seen that through centuries. And right now, to good social progress, we're seeing significant backlash. And now the people and supermajorities are basically putting their feet on our neck, right? So, sometimes a full frontal assault is a good one. Sometimes it's not. And so I do think we've got to think creatively, and in smaller groups, all of us have to work very hard at having those conversations and basically thinking about what's in our control and influence and what's out of our control, and really trying to influence as best we can. Document the record, support folks like Alana and I in the caucus, work in campaigns, you know, emphasize and try to teach people, but also listen, learn, draw them toward us. It's going to take another, you know, movement. But I do think some people, you know, they voted in such a way, they're going to get what they voted for. And I think some of them are going to realize like, hey, ooh, that's a little too far. And that's what swings that pendulum back. So as it swings, you know, I said at the Women's March, you know, think about how we show up all the time, who we are, and so we can get people to walk toward us and control that pendulum.
And I believe that women are the ones that will save us on this. I believe that women are the hardest working, most organized people in the political process. They are the ones, in my experience, who do all the work. They are the ones who organize the events. They're the ones who plan the fundraisers, who knock the doors, who show up at the hearings, who write the letters to the editors. I mean, I think we are the ones who will move the needle. And a lot of the people on this call are the ones who will move the needle. And we need every single one of you. And being outnumbered is not a problem when you really show up. You know, what is the whole never question the ability of a small group of motivated people to change the world? That's the only thing that ever has. And I think we can and we will, and we have to. Failure is not an option. We can't let these people win and taking our rights away and bringing us back a century, not an option. So there are a lot of things that we can do, and I think a lot of you on this call are doing them. I think that 2026 is going to be, now if history is any indication, 2026 should be a lot better for us. If Trump does any of the things he's talking about doing, it's going to be a wholesale catastrophe. There's going to be a backlash. If he starts, deporting the entire agricultural workforce and deporting the entire home building workforce and all this, it's going to drive inflation through the roof. There are going to be a lot of disasters as he goes on his wrecking ball agenda, and there will be a backlash. There was in 2018. 2018 was a great year for Democrats. We picked up seats in the legislature. We picked up seats nationwide. So we need to be ready to seize this opportunity and spring into action. I know everybody's feeling very beaten down and depressed right now. Me among them. I worked really hard in the 2024 races, and that was incredibly heartbreaking. But the fundamentals are, the wind is in our sails for 2026. Historically, as we all know, that midterm election after a new administration is when there's that big backlash and the other party comes roaring back into power. I believe at the federal level, we will take back Congress. I believe we will take back significant seats in Idaho. But again, all of that is going to take us doing work. But it's a lot of people on this call know what that work is. We got to have candidates. So if any of you want to run, we need people to help those candidates, throw house parties, knock doors, help those candidates get organized. We need people to show up, lobby, speak at the Capitol, write letters to the editor, get the message out on social media, all the things. There's a million things. A lot of you know what they are. But there's real opportunity, if we seize it, to turn this around in a big way in less than 2 years now.
And I just want to add one more thing, if that's okay, before we go. I see Betty on the call. I see Kathy Dawes. I see Lynn Strong. How many doors has Lynn knocked? Holy smoke. There are folks who are organizing. So Kathy Dawes, I see her reaching out, across the state with action items and things to do. And she's so smart. And if you're not a part of her listserv, you should. Diane Garvey is another organizer. Amazing. Betty Richardson, amazing. So again, I would say too, is really find a group who is organizing and communicating and getting you information. And then you can work together and be more a greater force with each other, right?
Well, thank you so much. This is Ginny, and I got to thank Mary for terrible cell service in Idaho. Gosh, we don't need any broadband or anything, but I thank both our senator and our representative for all the wisdom that you always share with us. And February 3rd, we are looking to have a Pack the Gallery, all the colors of blue. I'm so glad you gave the shout out to Betty Richardson and the Idaho Women Forward. I'm saying it wrong, I think. I have so many groups right now that I'm thinking of that are doing such great work, but we can all be doing something. But if we can show up February 3rd, 10 o'clock, 10:30 downstairs garden level, I've got room 17 arranged. We can leave our things. We can go upstairs, get introduced on the House floor, go across the hall, get introduced on the Senate floor, and let's show them all the women in blue. You can be a magenta. You could be a teal. You could be solid royal blue. You could be even, just a little purple. You're still not sure. But if we could show up in mass and pack that gallery and let them know that we are paying attention. We are going to pay attention when they come in for a ballot initiative. We are going to pay attention when they come back trying to get health care, every little niche that they can. And we are going to be supporting our incredibly hardworking Democratic leaders. So it would be super. We would really love to have everyone there. I'm going to have a little bit of the training on how do you testify. So that'll be there. They've got a scavenger hunt that goes with the Capitol. And we have the tour set up for 1 o'clock. So if you've not been in the building, you can take the tour. That's the first 30 people that let us know. So that's some more ways you can get involved right away. All the marches were so great this last weekend. So good to see women just showing up for each other and the men that support women and sanity. I don't think it's a gender thing anymore, regardless of how many genders you count, but sanity should be in there. I thank you all so much.
Thank you so much,
Thank
y'all.
you. Such a joy to see you all here. We sure could use the friendly faces right now.
Thank you so much, y'all. I'm going to go see my husband now.
Thank you so much.
Don't forget the dog.
Yeah.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
You.